Well, hello, Mark. How are you at the moment?
I'm very well, Rupert. Thank you. And you?
Yeah. It's been it's been a bit of a frustrating day with technology, but that's beside the point. Now, for people who are listening in on this, I better explain. Mark Jones here is the incumbent Police and Crime Commissioner in Lincolnshire. I think you were first elected nearly 5 years ago now, isn't it?
Indeed, yeah. 2016, I started.
Wow.
It's flown by. It's flown by.
Oh, good. Well, that's good news. Anyway, and Mark may well be putting this out, so I better explain. My name is Rupert Matthews. I'm the Conservative candidate to be Police and Crime Commissioner in Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, which is three very different areas. So unlike in Lincolnshire, where you've got lots and lots of countryside and a sort of city of about, 80,000 people in the middle, I've got a city of 400,000 people, and then quite a lot of rural area. And then Rutland, of course, is a completely separate county. And about 40 years ago or so, the powers that be decided it was too small to have its own police force. And it got merged in with Leicestershire, which has been a bone of contention ever since, as you can imagine. Anyway, I'm in the position of being a Conservative candidate with an incumbent Labour Police and Crime Commissioner. Labour PCC has been here for 5 years. And while in many respects, he's done an okay job, certainly some of the initiatives he's set up, I'll be wanting to continue. But when it comes to rural crime, he's sort of taken his eye off the ball a bit, if you like. And certainly the new Labour candidate, Labour have chosen, is a councillor in the middle of the city of Leicester. He was born in the city of Leicester. He grew up in the city of Leicester. He's lived his entire life in the city of Leicester. And what I fear is that he's really going to continue on with this attitude that Labour have got, where they don't really understand the countryside. They don't understand how village life works. And up to a point, he's not really going to care. So I think that this election is particularly important for people in rural villages. But Mark, you took over from a Labour PCC, didn't you? So what was your experience there?
Well, the PCC I took over from was technically an independent.
Oh, okay.
And actually, when I started in 2016, what I found was that very little had been done to support our rural communities. And as you highlight, they come in different forms. There are small market towns, there are villages, but actually there's a lot of isolated individual properties, whether they're farms, whether they're tied cottages, any number of things. And they've all got very different needs. And making sure policing happens across the entire patch is really challenging. And what I found was that I took over with a force that was struggling more than Leicestershire and Rutland, and I will call it Leicestershire and Rutland force, because I think they deserve that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you have got the luxury of a little bit more funding than over in Lincolnshire, but the challenge we had was that it had been not invested in. We didn't have the right tools to do the job. There were no 4x4s, for example, apart from a couple that were driven by inspectors because they quite liked them. But there wasn't.
Can I just stop you there? Lincolnshire, everyone who knows, Lincolnshire is a huge rural county, and
it is.
Doesn't have any 4x4s. That is astonishing.
No 4x4s, and no plan to invest in them. And this was something that we worked with the chief constable, who was an excellent guy, who but was financially constrained. And the one thing I think Conservative PCCs bring is that financial acumen to be able to say, well, how do we best spend our money to get it where it needs to be at the front line, to invest in the right tools to do the job. So we worked together, we bought some 4x4s, we started investing in drones, we built up the dog unit, we started building up the kit that was needed. Yeah. What was also needed, though, was some specialist training for the officers, because there's nothing more demoralising for the force to be sending out an officer from the centre of Leicester who's worked their patch really, really well, really efficiently, and suddenly we're expecting them to know the intricacies of the hunting act, etc., etc. Yeah. So they've got to have the training to protect our rural communities. And that made a huge difference. And the one thing that we did, which made a massive difference, we were the first force in the country to start seizing the dogs of hare coursers. So as soon as we started saying, right, we're going to, you know, you're using this dog for criminal acts, you're, you know, trespassing, you're damaging land, you are gambling high volumes of money, all the things that we get with hare coursing. We were seizing the dogs. In the first year, we spent nearly £50,000 on kennel costs alone.
Wow.
We took over, it was nearly 110 dogs we took in that first year. But boy, did it make a difference for year 2 and year 3. So in the first year, in 2016, we had nearly 2,000 reported incidents of hare coursing. And within a year, we'd gone down to less than 1,000. And it continued to drop. It's about having the right tools, the right attitude, the right training. And you've got an excellent chief constable. He's a really good guy, very experienced, you know, the most experienced chief in the region, many would argue. What he needs is a PCC that's going to back him, give him the right tools to do the job, make the finance available. And I'm absolutely positive that our rural communities across the East Midlands can be better served. And in particular, my residents are stronger and safer if yours are, because the one thing we don't want is a really strong Lincolnshire for rural crime, sending all of its poachers and all of its hare coursers to you.
You know, I wasn't going to say this, Mark, but when I've been out and about over the past, well, I've been in about 18 months, and of course, more recently, I've been doing lots of Zoom meetings and so on. And the people who are talking about hare coursing and livestock stealing, you know, where livestock are slaughtered in the field and the meat taken away. That is predominantly actually over in the eastern end of the county, which is near you, and butting onto Cambridgeshire. The western end of the county, over by Ashby de la Zouche and that sort of area, not so much. We've got plenty of lovely countryside there, but the sort of crimes people there are concerned about are more sort of people focused, if you like. So burglary, car, catalytic converters at the moment are a thing being stolen. So, you know, the really rural crimes, if you like, as opposed to crimes taking place in rural villages, is very much over your side of the county. And it's not just hare coursing, and I know you've done really good work there. Another problem that we have in rural villages is that of thefts from lead being stolen from church roofs. And of course,
it absolutely is.
Knock-on effect of damage to the building, damage to the furniture. And certainly one village where this happened about 18 months ago, it had a huge impact on the village community. You know, it's a very settled village. It's not one of these where you have lots of commuters. And a lot of people in the village, or you know, moved maybe to the next door village, they'd been christened in the church. They'd been married in the church. Their children had been christened in the church. And it really tore at the guts of that community. But again, you know, this must be something that affects Lincolnshire as well.
It absolutely is. And probably 2.5 years ago, we were having a huge spate of these. And the first thing that the force did was respond really proactively and put in place a specially trained crime prevention officer to work with the national organisations that prevent historic crimes and protect historic buildings, to get a lot of training, knowledge. And actually they went from church to church to church, giving the best advice on how they could avoid being a victim of that particular crime. And I'd have to say the vast majority that took that advice were not then targeted. So that's a key element, is about prevention. And making sure that our communities do not become victims. But the other element was where we were being targeted. It was clearly an organised crime group. It was not a couple of scallies from the next village. This was an organised, orchestrated thing. They were targeting tens of churches, and it seemed to be up and down the A1 corridor in particular. So that gave the police somewhere to start.
What's happening in Leicestershire as well.
And what that enabled was proper intelligence-led policing. And as you know, both Leicestershire and Lincolnshire are part of the an East Midlands collaboration to tackle serious and organised crime. They were involved, but in particular, Lincolnshire was hard hit. And we put together an operation called Operation History. And as you know, we don't send cops in particular directions. That's under the chief's direction.
Yeah.
But the chief was really clear this needed to be tackled. I was feeding in that information from residents about the impact upon their community. And they ran this operation. And over a period of time, evidence gathered, and it was felt that somewhere between 40 and 80 churches had been robbed of their lead. I mean, literally, we haven't had our churches under attack like that since the Vikings were here. It's a huge issue. And this gang were traced, the intelligence was gathered, and this operation run out of little old Lincolnshire had a national impact because this gang were arrested, they were charged, they've been to court, and they're now in prison. We've got sentences of over 6 years for the two main ringleaders, slightly less for the two others that were helping them. And that particular band were put away. We need to work stronger together across the region to make our region safe from those kind of criminals, those organised crime groups, because they have a direct impact on our community. And in a very safe little village, if you've only got a church, you might not have a shop. If that then loses £30,000, £100,000 worth of lead for the sake of some criminals getting £1,000, it's a hugely debilitating thing. And we need to do all we can as PCCs to support them.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And I think, something that I'm sure, well, I hope is going to make a big difference is if there's a PCC in office who actually cares about rural areas and cares about what goes on, that's going to make a big difference. I mean, we've known each other for quite some time, Marc, so you're going to know I'm actually from London. And my old dad was born within the sound of Bow Bells, so you don't get much more London than that. But, I chose to move up here. I'm in a lovely little village now. I'm on the parish council, trying to get, really involved with rural life. And it's taken me a long time to really get to grips with society here, what people are interested in, what their attitudes are. And I was wondering, you mentioned earlier about training and so on. Is there not just a role for training, but perhaps for sort of trying, when you're allocating police officers to a neighbourhood and to an area, I'm sort of trying to keep them static for a while so they can build up all the relationships that they need to build up with the parish councils, the pub landlords, and so on? Or do you think it is more that, to do with skills and you can move them on quickly? Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a challenge because where there are promotion opportunities, you're going to see people move on, and the brightest and the best are going to move around. But equally, the backbone of policing for me is the 30-year serving Bobby, who is happy being a constable, who understands everything there is to know about being a constable. They are the backbone of policing. But there's a lot of people that will want progression, and that's great, and we've got to support that. One thing that we can do, and this is something that I'm really keen to do, and I'm sure you will be too, is to support our special constabulary, because these are people of the community for the community. And just this year, one thing I've managed to do is get my local authorities to support a council tax discount scheme for our special constables.
Oh, really?
Which means that from April, our special constables that serve our county, and these are farmers' sons and daughters, teachers, you name it. They're people who give up their free time to police with a full warrant in our community. They will get a 25% discount on their council tax. Because as you know, we all pay a proportion of our council tax towards policing. And I would say they pay theirs in a very physical way. So I don't see that they should pay it twice. So I would hope that that will be a thank you to the ones that we have and an encouragement to those that we don't yet have. Because our rural community, if we could encourage our farmers' sons and daughters and our rural communities to come and stand firm with us as specials, they very much could be rural specials serving our rural community. And what better way to build our numbers of people that really understand our rural community than that. So I think that's a really powerful way that we can work together.
If you don't mind, I think I'll be pinching that idea if I win the election. Because not only, of course, is it a direct financial benefit to the specials, but it's telling them how valued they are, and that it's not just the people that they meet when they're on duty who appreciate the job they're doing, but the institution, the council, really recognises, the contribution that they're making. That brings me on to another thing, because, I'm quite keen on, I suppose, what you might call community mobilisation, for want of another word. And that is involving organisations like parish councils, Speedwatch. Do you have Speedwatch in Lincolnshire?
We do, very much.
Brilliant. And those sorts of groups, which can do a lot of hard work in their immediate locality, and can work with the police and take the weight off their shoulders to an extent. But again, they need to be encouraged. So that, they need to see the results of the work they're doing. So to take Speedwatch as an example, it is a lonely business, standing by the side of the road with the speed gun in your hand and the fluorescent jacket on, and you might be there for 2 or 3 hours. It's lonely, you get cold, you get wet. But really, I want to massively encourage that sort of community participation in policing in its wider sense. And I was just wondering, what do you do with your Speedwatch to sort of try and encourage that sort of participation?
Well, firstly, there wasn't a Speedwatch when I arrived. It was something I was keen to set up and promote through the Road Safety Partnership. And we now have 57 parishes that actively take part in that. And it is really powerful. And to give you an example around the system, really, as you will know, is volunteers trained to use properly, professionally, the equipment to monitor speed. They are not there to give fines. They are there to help change behaviour. Yes. And they will send a first letter which basically says, you were speeding in this area. Please don't do that. This is the negative impact it can have on our community. Now, we gave around 8,000 of those letters in the last 12 months. We only gave around 60 second letters. Now, that shows you how many people took notice of the first letter.
Yes.
And it was a very small handful that got a third letter. Now, the third letter is important because it's hand delivered by a PC or a PCSO to your house. Now, that's
going to make an impact.
Quite a challenge. Yeah. So, but it's not about fining. It's not about making money out of the public. It's about us all being better citizens, because the vast majority, somewhere between 80 and 90% of all speeding happens because it's people in that community or the next one that are doing it. Yeah. It's not strangers. It's not people that don't know the roads. It's your friends, your neighbours. It's you. It's me. It's all of us. And if we work better together, that will work. With parishes, you're absolutely right. They are the key to local community safety. They're the eyes and ears. I mean, in Lincolnshire, I've got 507 parish councils. They are really the backbone. And, we've had a bit of fun online lately with Jackie Weaver and talking about parish councils.
Yeah.
But actually, when I go past one of our village churches that we were talking about earlier, and I see those flowers growing on the grass verge, I know that somebody sat in a meeting somewhere and made the decision that they were going to invest a few pounds in their community to make that look better. And that's what parish councils are. They are the people that protect our community. And one of the things we've had with some of our parish councils is they've reached out and said, what can we do? What can we do to make our community safer? How can we help? And they obviously are an authority with money as well. Yeah. And one or two of them, we've worked with them, and they have funded automatic number plate recognition cameras for their community. So they're in static locations, they're fastened to lampposts, etc. So they take their power from there. So the county council effectively fund the electric, which is a very tiny amount of money. But the small amount, relatively small amount that the cameras cost to put in and then to run, they're about £300 a year to run, mean that their community has that level of protection. So if there is a local van coming around, breaking into vehicles, burgling, stealing lead off the church roofs, the police will have the intelligence. So actually building up your network of ANPR cameras is something that parishes can really help with without them incurring massive long-term costs. So that's something that I love to work with parishes on. But you're absolutely right. they're the eyes and ears on the ground. And also they'll tell you what the concerns of residents are. And as a PCC, I value that so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And intelligence, of course, is absolutely crucial in rural areas because, I mean, I'd imagine even if we had 3 or 4 times as many police officers as we do, it's still a lot of miles and a lot of open fields between the villages. So, you know, there's going to be a lot of gaps in the police coverage, and the intelligence can make that work. So I was just wondering, how's this organised in Lincolnshire? Do you have like a central intelligence unit that feeds everything and filters everything and so on, or is it more dissipated? How's that working?
Yeah, I mean, it depends what it is. We don't, I mean, there isn't a specific unit for rural because they shouldn't be treated differently in that respect. What we do have, for example, are specific targets around response time. So if you call in with an urgent call to the police, there are some expectations about how quickly they will be able to respond in both urban and rural areas. From an intelligence point of view, we do have an intelligence bureau that is able to bring all of the information together. But one of the things that's a real challenge is how we take what might seem quite simple bits of information and turn them into something that's meaningful. And this is where it's vital that residents never, ever say to themselves, there's no point in reporting it. Nothing ever happens. Well, they're quite right. Yeah. Nothing might happen on that single piece of evidence or information they're giving, but put them together, it builds the picture. And the one thing I would absolutely say to residents, and I hear this a lot, is if you don't report it, we don't know about it. And as PCCs, we're tasked with going to government, fighting for additional funding for our community. Well, if there's more reports, if there's more information, that gives you and I the ability to go to Westminster, back our community and say, do you know what? The good people of Rutland, of Leicestershire, of Lincolnshire, we are being shortchanged. We need more resources to deliver a better service. And, you know, we will stand shoulder to shoulder in that fight, but we can only do it with that intelligence from the local community.
That's absolutely right. And as we've already said, you know, things like parish councils and neighbourhood and watch are all going to be feeding into that. And I'm a big believer anyway in, you know, sort of community mobilisation and getting the community up. Because the vast majority of people do want to help the police. It's more a matter of being guided in how they can most constructively do that. Now, one of the things we haven't touched on, but which has been a problem in bits of Leicestershire, and I would imagine Lincolnshire as well, and that is livestock thefts. And it is particularly distressing when a farmer goes to a field and finds the slaughtered remains of a couple of dozen sheep with bits and pieces of the body just left lying around in the field because the meat's been taken away to be sold illegally into the food chain. I was just wondering, is that a problem in Lincolnshire?
It's less of a problem for us. It does happen, but often the bigger problem for us is around poaching. So whether that's deer that are being shot at night, which obviously means often they're not cleanly killed, the animals can be left in distress for a very long period of time. But nevertheless, the kind of individuals that will do one will often be connected to the other. Yeah. And, you know, we don't have quite so many livestock issues, but we do have them. And it is really distressing. And it's not just the distress for the farmer, but the effect on their livelihood, the margins for farming. People seem to think farmers earn vast sums of money. And anybody who understands the rural community will know that the margins can be exceptionally tight. So losing, you know, 30, 40 sheep, and often we've seen these kind of numbers disappearing across the country in one night, can be hugely problematic. The trauma of losing one or two is terrible. And we need to take these individuals and put them in front of a court, because, as you know, if they're able to take that animal and then place it in the food chain, and these aren't people that are selling cuts of meat down the pub, which is bad enough. Yeah. People that are feeding, pardon the pun, into the restaurant trade and into the wider food chain. These are unsuspecting customers that are buying meat, and there could be many reasons why they shouldn't be eating that product. It could have been several days in the back of a truck, unrefrigerated, any number of things. Yeah. So we absolutely need to stop these people. And that's why, again, it comes back to intelligence. Have you seen suspicious vehicles, et cetera, et cetera? And one of the things we launched in Lincolnshire was an extension to Neighbourhood Watch, which was around people that are going hacking on their horses. They are out there for a lovely ride. How can we work with them to say, well, with a little bit of training and support, and with a brightly coloured tabard upon your back, you'll be safer, but also it will highlight that you are part of our rural watch, because people who've seen something suspicious can say, I've just seen something strange down the road. I've seen a car parked in a lane. I've seen somebody wandering across a field full of sheep, whatever it happens to be. And I think working with our rural community to say, we're not asking you to police, we're asking you to prevent crime by being good citizens, like Neighbourhood Watch has done for many decades. Yeah. And I think there's an awful lot more we can do with our communities to give them the information to say, well, what does suspicious look like? And equally, what should you do with that information? But policing then needs to do something meaningful with it. And that's the important thing, because anybody that's from our rural community listening to us tonight will say, that all sounds lovely. When I rang the police, it took too long to get through, or they didn't come back to me. They're the kind of challenges we need to work with our chief constables with, to say it's important that you do get back to our residents, that you do something meaningful with that intelligence, because that, I think, is one of the biggest problems.
Yeah, no, so I'm really interested you're talking about these riders on horseback, because here in Leicestershire, we used to have exactly that scheme. And it was very popular amongst the horse riding community. I think it had a big take-up. Certainly, when I've been moving around the villages and going to village fetes and so on, I've come across several people that used to be part of it, but then it was scrapped. And I think, again, this is one of the problems that Labour has, where it fails our rural communities, because they just don't understand what's going on. And so, with the Labour PCC, the chief constable, and as you say, we've got a very good chief constable here in Leicestershire. But, if he's constantly being had a go at about what are you doing about crime in the middle of Leicester, what are you doing about crime in the middle of Leicester, if he's got to move some resources around, it's going to be from the rural area that it comes. Now, we've covered quite a lot of ground in the past 25 minutes. So we've been talking a lot about rural crime tonight, and this is obviously about rural crime. As I said earlier, I'm actually out of London, so, I know and understand about urban crime as well. And I know, of course, Lincoln is a smaller city than Leicester, but it is a city. It's got a beautiful cathedral and a castle and all the rest of it. So you must have to deal with urban crime, just as if I win this election, I'm going to have to be keeping an eye on urban crime, albeit with a greater extent. So again, you came in fresh, you took over from quite a different sort of person as Police and Crime Commissioner. What's been your experience with urban crime over the past 4 or 5 years?
Well, first thing I would say is thank you for pointing out what a beautiful city Lincoln is. And obviously, the other thing I would say is that you are in a unique position for PCCs, because you are standing for the beautiful areas of Rutland and Leicestershire, which you obviously used to represent the whole of the East Midlands. So you used to represent the fair city of Lincoln as well. So, you have actually represented more rural areas than any one of us has done.
That's true. And I'll chuck one other thing in, if I may, at this point. It was when I was out in Brussels as a member of the European Parliament. For the very first time, I got to really understand public sector budgeting. On the council down in London for 8 years. But the things I'd always, different committees I sat on when I was in London, I got to be sort of effectively head of Parks and Gardens at one point. I never had to look at the central budget and really get to grips with that. But the years I spent in Brussels, honestly, the budget mayhem going on out there and trying to get to grips. And so, I'm really confident now that if I get elected, I'm faced with the police budget of getting on for 200 million quid. I am going to actually understand what's going on, because public sector and private sector are really quite different when it comes to how budgets are written. Hey, I interrupted you. I do apologise.
No, and I think you make a really good point, because one of the things the public doesn't really understand yet about PCCs is what the role actually is. We don't tell the chief what to do. We don't run operational policing, but we do hold all the money. We are responsible for holding the council tax. We're responsible for holding government grant. We're responsible for getting additional money into our areas. And we're very successful PCCs at doing that, and how it's spent. And one of the things that's really important is understanding how to manage the budget, because you can only keep people safe if the chief can afford to put boots on the ground, cars on the road, and all the other services that go. So I think that's a hugely important point that you make there about your knowledge around finance. And I had the same. I was the finance lead for the county council before doing this, and that made a huge difference to me in being able to understand and challenge when I was being sold something that I wasn't buying, where a lot of PCCs without that experience would have been sold it. But with the point you make about urban crime, you're absolutely right. It's a huge challenge, and every area will be different. But Lincoln's about 100,000 people. It's grown with our student population, and
of course, yes.
It's you know, getting to be a small but growing city with its challenges. And one of the things that was hugely important is partnership working, understanding the needs around mental health, around local government, all of those things that you will have been part of with your previous role. And, you know, it's really important that you can work together collaboratively while making sure that you never lose sight of your ultimate aim, which is to keep people safer. The one thing that's always a challenge, everybody's got different budgets, different challenges, and our job is to keep pulling them back to the fact that, yes, that's all great. It's important to do these other things, but keeping people safe is the first duty of a government, of a local government, of a PCC. And we can go a lot further wrong than remembering that. That's our key thing. So our urban crimes are largely exported from other areas, whether we look at drug supply, county lines drugs, which is an issue across the country. Your drugs will be coming into Leicestershire from somewhere else. And, you know, again, there's a certain irony that they're all pretty much coming in from Labour controlled areas, but we need to work effectively as the East Midlands to support our East Midlands Serious and Organised Crime Unit. And I'll be honest, the more we can work together, the more the chiefs work together, the safer our residents will be. And that message of they're not just electing your residents of Rutland and Leicestershire are not just electing you to keep them safe, they're electing you to keep the East Midlands safe. And equally, the people of Lincolnshire are electing me for the exact opposite reason, to keep Lincolnshire and the East Midlands safe.
Yes.
You and I will be working together very closely for the next few years in that endeavour. And, you know, we will spend a lot of public money in making sure that our residents are safe. And I very much look forward to working with you, Rupert. I think you will be an outstanding PCC, and I think we will work together very well for our residents.
Well, you're a great flatterer, so thank you for that, Mark. And now we covered a lot of ground in the past half hour. I think we've agreed pretty much on what needs to be done with all different sorts of rural crime. And it's going to take a big commitment to rural crime and making sure that the chief constable has got the financial and other resources that it's a he at the minute, might be a she, who knows, needs in order to give the rural areas what they need. But I'll finish on one point, if I may. As you know, I'm a big fan of Sir Robert Peel. I think he was one of our best prime ministers. And of course, it was him, when he was Home Secretary, that set up the modern police force as we understand it, which is why policemen are called bobbies after Robert Peel. And right at the top of the list, you know, where the act setting up the Metropolitan Police, as it was originally, and then spreading out across the country, was that the primary duty of the police is to maintain the Queen's peace. And that means protecting the lives and the property of Her Majesty's subjects, which is all of us. So you're dead right on the duties. As I say, I think we've had a good chat about rural crime. There's a lot more that could be said, and certainly there are one or two issues we haven't touched on. But thank you for your time, Mark. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you. And touch wood, if I do get elected, I will look forward to working with you. Okay, so thanks.
It's been really good to speak to you. Thank you, Rupert.
Right. Cheerio. Bye-bye.